This week, we're giving you a wonderful treat, which is Star Trek. And I should tell you right now, I'm a huge fan of Star Trek.
Me
and
too.
One of my books is about Star Trek The Next Generation. The episode that you watched this week is called The Scientific Method, and it's from Star Trek Voyager. This show places a Starfleet ship out lost in space in Quadrant D, and it is captained by the first female captain in a lead role in a Star Trek series. So Captain Janeway is a scientist and a Starfleet officer. And so naturally, some gender issues are going to come up in this series and in this episode. And the title is very close to what you've been talking about in the astronomy readings. And so I think I'll let Jeff talk a little bit about the scientific method.
So once again, like in Cold Equations, the title is very descriptive. This is a story about alien scientists coming on board the starship and experimenting on the crew. And they're trying to help their race. They are medical researchers who are trying to develop treatments for whatever alien diseases they're suffering from. We're going to talk a lot about science in this course, and the scientific method is a very important thing because it's the approach that scientists take to their work. And that, from high school labs, is just the method you use for approaching any scientific problem. You find something that needs to be explained, you come up with a hypothesis which may explain what this is and how it works. And then you have to turn that into a theory, and that involves explaining all the observations that have been made of this phenomenon, and which predicts phenomena that would have not been observed yet, so that other scientists can go out and test your theory to see if it's correct. And so it's a good thing in this episode to see these scientists. Are they following the scientific method? And what do you think of them as scientists? Because often scientists get criticized because they are thought to be unemotional and just following their scientific process without thinking about the ramifications of their work. And so this is a perfect example of scientists who are perhaps following the scientific method, yes, but should they be doing these experiments?
And this is a question as old as science fiction or really human culture itself. And so if you look at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, that is a huge issue about the ethics of practicing science. Just because you can do something, does that mean that you should do it? A few words about some of the characters, the other characters who are important. The B'Elanna Torres is an engineer, and she is half Vulcan, half human. Seven of Nine is half human, and she has been mechanized or Borgized so that she's partly machine. And so these characters have a different kind of relationship to the other crew members and also to the practice of science. And as they struggle with what's correct and how to help their crewmates, they also are practicing a version of science. So we sort of have competing versions of science. A question that I will have for you is whether Captain Janeway's decision to sort of play chicken with the alien scientists is appropriate or not. Is she right to take that really drastic measure in order to rid the ship of the alien scientists who are practicing on them? So Star Trek and other television shows and literary texts ask us to look at the cultural context of science and to understand as a society what is ethical and what isn't. And that's a question that you as a reader will have to decide also.
Well, I think the ending is to raise the dramatic level. Obviously, flying past neutron star or black hole is considered quite dangerous.
But fun. It's quite beautiful.
And some of the effects that you see are also realistic, although it's hard to say. But the differential gravity or the tidal forces, which we'll talk about later in the class, are what they're feeling as they get close to this condensed star, which has huge gravity and huge tidal forces, which are actually serving to rip the ship apart. And so, as far as that goes, it's fairly realistic. But the question then is, whether she should be putting her whole crew at risk. But I think she feels that the aliens are never going to let go. Or the thing that I found was most troubling was that half the aliens died trying to get off the ship. If they just stayed on the ship, they probably would have been okay. But she scared them so much that they just
Right.
took off.
Well, it would be nice to say that this has no counterparts in human history, but sadly, the opposite is true. There are numerous examples, including many in our own country, of scientific experimentation on animals and humans that I think most of you would find extremely repugnant. So, even though this is set in the distant future, in a distant quadrant of space, it has a lot of relevance for issues and problems that we face in our own 21st century world.
Anyway, we hope you enjoy Star Trek as much as we do.
And if you don't, you might want to just at least be tactful.
Yes, one of the really good tips for this class to get an A is to say that you like Star Trek on Robin's test.
Well, Jeff is kidding, of course. I will not be grading on whether you love Star Trek or not, but it is a show that is very rewarding in terms of understanding literature, themes, and also the practice of science. Jeff just notified me that I misspoke, and we can't let such a gross misunderstanding stand. Of course, B'Elanna Torres, and Jeff has B'Elanna Torres in his office in a 6-foot cardboard cutout. She is not half Vulcan, she is half Klingon. And there is a huge difference because the Klingons are a very hyper-masculine, warlike species of being. And so it's very important that you have watched all the way to the end of this video or watch Star Trek Voyager carefully to understand B'Elanna Torres is half Klingon and half human. A very interesting mix. Thank you, Jeff, for that important correction.
You're welcome, Robin.